Hi, everyone. I'm Phil Stoltzfus, Vice President of Marketing and PR with 3Aware. And today I'm joined by Dr. Mary Beth Lynch. She is Principal Clinical Scientist with 3Aware. We don't have a formal agenda today for our chat, really. It's just a practical conversation about what it takes to turn real-world data into defensible device evidence. Just by way of background, Mary Beth is a clinical research leader with deep expertise designing and running pre and post-market medtech studies to support regulatory submissions, post-market surveillance, and market access. Before she joined 3Aware, Mary Beth spent over 10 years managing clinical research projects within the medtech industry, and she has also worked in academia as a research scientist, where she's authored over 10 peer-reviewed publications and abstracts. Mary Beth, thanks so much for taking the time to chat today. Let's jump in.
Sure thing. Thank you, Phil.
All right, so first, let's start here. When you saw the 3Aware platform for the very first time, what surprised you the most?
For me, the biggest surprise about the platform was how quickly you can move from a real regulatory or clinical question to actual submission-ready evidence. You can answer your research questions with real-world data in just a fraction of the time that it takes to complete a traditional clinical research study. Um, Other tools might give you more data, but the burden stays on the scientist then to piece together context, endpoints, and follow-up. What surprised me about 3Aware is the specificity of the workflow for devices, especially the emphasis on device identification, procedural context, and longitudinal outcomes, having both structured and unstructured information accessible all in one place.
Great. And, speaking of data, the term real world evidence or RWE gets thrown around an awful lot. And in our space, we talk an awful lot about med tech specific evidence, as opposed to more generic RWE. In your opinion and in your experience, why isn't generic real world evidence enough when it comes to med tech?
Right, that's a good question that people are asking. Because devices operate within specific workflows, for me, that's the answer. For MedTech, the key question isn't just did the outcomes change? It also includes which device was used, how was it used, on whom, and what happened over time. So, generic real world evidence can be useful for identifying maybe broad trends, but device evidence needs tighter certainty around identification, procedural nuance, and durability, and often over longer follow-up windows, plus enough clinical context to be able to interpret the outcomes.
Got it. So let's talk about the process a little bit. At 3Aware, we do feasibility studies. So can you describe that process for our feasibility studies?
Yeah, a feasibility study is a way to potentially avoid months of investment in a study that won't be able to answer your key questions. So during feasibility, we test whether or not a study's key objectives are answerable with the available data. So can we define the cohort precisely? Can we reliably identify the device and determine whether the required data elements are available to meet the study's objectives and within a specific time frame? It's also where we identify potential limitations early on, like maybe gaps in data capture, endpoint availability or reliability, and then any confounding factors that would compromise interpretation of the data. So the value of a feasibility project is the speed and the reduction of scientific risk. And with that, after you're done, you can make a confident go, no go decision before you commit to a full study.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, that is definitely valuable when it comes to these projects. So, speaking of the projects, feasibility studies, and the process overall, what is something that you wish every medtech team knew before they started a real world evidence project?
Yeah. Well, it's important to start with specific project goals and endpoints, like you would for any study, not just focus on the deliverable, not just say we need this real world evidence. Too many projects begin with, oh, we need real world evidence, and go out to try to find it instead of we need to answer this specific regulatory or clinical question. So if you define the overall goal, or question that the study is trying to answer, then the primary endpoints and whatever data elements are required to measure, everything gets a lot cleaner. It's also important to clearly state how you're defining your cohort, what follow-up time period is needed, any potential confounders, and then your criteria for success, both technical and clinical success. Another important factor is to build in traceability from day one. If you can't show how the cohort and endpoints were defined and measured, then the evidence will be less impactful.
Got it. And so speaking of cohorts, endpoints, traceability, and device identification, and other clinical information, um, people often throw around device identification. What does this actually mean and look like in practice?
Yeah. So it means being able to say with defensible confidence that patient A received this device or device family at a specific time point and in a particular clinical context. The data that we have may involve unique device identifiers, catalog or product numbers, clinical procedure codes, and information about other devices that can be used to confirm how and when a device was used. The goal isn't just, well, we think it was this device, it's eliminating any ambiguity so that the cohort is real and reproducible. The end result is that our 3Aware product includes specific device identification that enables MedTech teams to be able to ensure traceability for safety and regulatory purposes.
Got it. And speaking of safety, and delving into the clinical information and determining clinical outcomes, how do unstructured notes factor into this work? Do they matter?
Oh, absolutely. So for me, this is the true gem of the 3Aware platform. The unstructured notes help answer a lot of the why questions. So why was this device chosen? Also, how was it deployed? The rationale for any complications that were encountered, how patients reported their outcomes, and the background behind a clinician's observations during the procedure. So the structured fields rarely capture the full narrative of the procedure or any nuances. These notes can help clarify timing, progression of symptoms, or reasons for any possible reinterventions. So for device evidence, that context can be the difference between a clean interpretation or one that's misleading.
Got it. Um, so now in the context of regulatory review,
Mhm.
what do we mean when we say fit for purpose? What does that actually mean for the regulator audience?
Yeah, so fit for purpose means that the evidence is aligned to the question. It's measured reliably, and there's transparency about the methodology and any limitations. So, practically speaking, you identify clear cohorts, you define your endpoints up front, and you include appropriate follow-up, and you produce outputs that are then reproducible. It also means you can explain the chain of custody for the data and why the sources are appropriate. So the strongest evidence um, isn't perfect evidence, it's defensible.
Defensible. Got it. All right, I have two more questions to wrap us up here. First, what are some of the pitfalls that you often see with RWE projects?
Well, there are three that show up a lot. First is ambiguous cohorts, having unclear device identification or unclear inclusion-exclusion criteria, maybe or not clearly defined. So that's one. Second would be endpoints that aren't reliably observable. Or it might be something that's inconsistent across different geographic sites, different locations, or over time. And the third would be underestimating follow-up needs. So, especially for questions related to a device's durability or looking for procedure revisions and long-term outcomes. I would add one bonus would be uh, treating feasibility as an optional step. So, feasibility, I think, is where you learn whether the data that we have can support the scientific claim, and it's a very crucial part.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Really insightful. And then finally, uh, if we do the work well, if these projects are handled well and carried to completion, what does good, what does a good end result look like at the finish line for any given real world evidence project?
Now, that is a great question, right? Um, Good looks like evidence that tells a clear, traceable story. So you define your cohorts that are reproducible, measuring endpoints in a reliable way, including appropriate follow-up time period and interpreting results within that appropriate clinical context. It's not just a table of outcomes. It's a narrative that holds together under scrutiny. And ideally, it's evidence a team can build on and use over time as as new and more patient data becomes available.
Perfect. Well, Mary Beth, this was incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. Um, if you, the audience, are watching and you're thinking about a PMCF project or label expansion or a new evidence question for a device that you have, I think the big takeaway here is start with the question, prove feasibility early, and build traceability into everything. Would you agree, Mary Beth?
Absolutely, that covers it. Thanks, Phil.
You bet. And if you'd like to share more on feasibility, uh, if you'd like us to share more on feasibility, device identification, or what fit for purpose actually looks like for your particular use case, I would encourage anyone watching to connect with us. Send us a message or click on the request demo button on our website, 3aware.ai, and that's the number 3aware.ai. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in.